You started this with the discussion of I think you did, the Israelis attacking targets in Syria that are effectively potentially Turkish targets. The Turks sent a delegation of officers into Syria to look at an airfield that had belonged to Assad and decide whether it could be rehabilitated, rebuilt, and then utilized. Just after they left, the Israeli Air Force showed up and demolished the place and then made threats against Erdogan and against Turkey. You have right now in that part of the world something akin to what I called some time ago the Nazi-Soviet Pact of 1939. Effectively, Syria became a kind of Poland between these two opposites because underneath the skin, both of these groups hate each other. And so the question was, how long will this last? Well, I think this is beginning to unravel. And the United States put that together because they were trying to make the Middle East safe for Israel and its Greater Israel project. Well, that's kind of coming to an end now because you have the Saudi-Turkish-Pakistani alliance, or alignment, if you want to call it that is opposed to the Greater Israel project. And now you have the Turks who regard Israel as this loose cannon, and they're going to respond very violently if there are future attacks against them or their troops. That could easily happen. It wouldn't take very much. So the north, what do you call it? The northeastern portion of the Middle East is unraveling. You have the war with Iran that's continuing, and you would think that someone in Israel would see that as long as Iran remains defiant and is opposed to them, and there is no agreement between them, opening another front that would include the Turks would be suicidal. But apparently they don't care about that. I think even the people in Washington are afraid of that now. And I think that's why you were hearing about NATO to some extent. Again, that's an excuse, but it's also always been Donald Trump's interest in disengaging us from the cash cow that is NATO and Europe. That's understandable. But now he's got another problem, Turkey. Turkey is still a NATO member. If the Israelis and the Turks fight, where do we come down? Well, it's obvious we will support Israel, come hell or high water. If we're out of the NATO alliance, it makes that much easier.
It's remarkable. Like, what a moment.
What a mess.
I mean, yeah, but that's exactly the pivot moment, right? They attack Turkey, and the next day President Trump makes a speech about leaving NATO. Colonel, we'll get you out of here. We just had another question here from one of our viewers who says, from Kentucky, hello from Kentucky, says, love your show. Do you think we will resort to chemical or biological weapons? Great show. What do you think about that, Colonel?
No. Chemical and biological weapons are overrated. You can't control them. They don't obey very well. The thing I'm concerned about, and everyone should be concerned about, is the potential for the use of a tactical nuclear weapon. Tactical nuclear weapons are 5 or 10 kilotons or less. And the assumption of the tactical nuclear weapon is that you get much more bang for your buck in terms of destruction, and that the enemy will then be intimidated in doing what you want them to do. People point to what happened at Hiroshima in 1945 and say, see, that ended the war. But they have to understand something. In 1945, Japan was effectively defeated, and it had no allies, none. Iran is not defeated. It has allies. Russia and China are rushing supplies right now into Iran, not just military assistance, but also humanitarian assistance, so that they have the food and the medicine and so forth that they need. So Iran is very much part of an unofficial alliance with Russia and Iran, and they're not going to allow Iran to go under. If we use a tactical nuclear weapon, which I think is possible, but hopefully Donald Trump will stay away from it and think about it more carefully. But there are people in the Pentagon, they mentioned Elbridge Colby, he's one. There are senior officers in the Air Force and the Navy, active and retired, who would be delighted to use those. And they think that they can do this and nothing worse will happen. And I always remind people of something that Colin Powell said when he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We used to have these massive simulations in which we would fight the Soviets. And then at some point, the simulation would end. That usually meant that we were no longer capable of holding back the millions of Soviet troops in the simulations. And instead of going to the nuclear level, the exercise would just end. And then people brought up the use of tactical nukes. And I always liked what General Powell said at that point. He said, oh, so you mean if we use a small tactical nuclear weapon and we get a small nuclear detonation, that the Soviets will say, oh, don't worry about that. That's a small nuclear weapon. Don't be concerned. Nothing bad will happen. And in reality, he said, that's insane. Whatever they've got, they'll use. You've lost control. Everything will be destroyed. Well, he was right. We have no way of knowing what kind of nuclear weapons might then be released to the use of the Iranians. And we have always worried about the rogue state called Israel and its capacity to employ nuclear weapons on its whim. That's bad enough. Why would we want to open that box?
Well, something that Daryl Cooper said on Tucker Carlson last week is that if the Israelis had calculated that they could have used their nuclear weapons without devastating repercussions, they would have done it by now. And so his calculation is that the only thing that keeps them from doing it is self-preservation. Do you calculate similarly?
Some feel that way, but others don't. And they've made it pretty clear that if they face defeat, they are prepared to use that as a revenge weapon. In other words, if we can't live here and we can't have it our way, we'll kill everybody else. I mean, literally, that's what it's down to. And that's very disturbing, but I think it's something we can't dismiss. Now, I didn't say all of the Israelis, but let's face it. When you have someone like Ben-Gvir, who is the equivalent of, let's say, the director of the FBI, suggesting that every day or every night, the IDF should kill another 30 to 40 people in Gaza and keep this up until they're all dead, what do you expect he's prepared to do?
Yes.
No. Been a while, and there's been a lot of crap that's happened. Would you say it seems like this thing has fizzled completely out of control? Would you say that we have lost this war with Iran officially?
Yes. Strategically, I think that's not in doubt at this point at all. You're watching someone who is flailing about, trying to find for why things haven't worked as he wanted. And unfortunately, that involves the blame game. So I think you're beginning to see this game of blaming NATO for why things didn't go better in the Middle East. I think we're going to be, exposed to this kind of thing in the future. It's all nonsense. We have no strategy. There never was a strategy. There was no preparation before we decided to do anything. There's no systematic examination of the risks involved, no understanding of what our interests were, because our interests are equated with Israeli interests and the interest of Israel's agents in the United States that are billionaires and are controlling so much of the financial system. There's no effective evaluation of our interests in Ukraine because we have none. We've never had any. And there's no interest to go to war with Russia. Yet we're very close to that in many respects. If you look at this bill that was just passed that memorializes Lindsey Graham, frankly, it reads like a declaration of war against Russia. One wonders who's in control, if anybody is in control. And I think you were right to point out what's going on right now in the bond market. The bond market is crashing. And you have Bessent who's trying to control the yield curve. Temporarily, he can do some of that by buying up the debt. And of course, the market likes that. That's an infusion of liquidity. So the market rises. Trump can point to that and see what a success I am. The market's rising. But it's all nonsense. It's all, what's the right word? Fugazi from The Wolf of Wall Street. Everything is Fugazi. Nothing is real. The sovereign national debt crisis is on full speed ahead.
And so now, Jared Kushner, he went on Fox News and he said, I told the Israelis that we will not stop them from their targeted strikes in Gaza, which says he is speaking on behalf of all of us, telling Israel, you go right ahead, keep bombing Gaza. And he said it is towards the purpose of demilitarization because the Gaza Peace Board wants to start our project, but we can't do that until the decks are cleared. I'm surprised, actually, to see this sort of nefarious criminal speak just spoken out loud. But at least now we all know that the United States will continue to support the genocide and clearing out of Gaza. And there's nothing we can do. What is your reaction to that?
I'm not surprised in the least. This is the Israel First government. It didn't make any difference who you voted for. You would have gotten the same outcome. Tony Blinken in the Biden administration was indistinguishable in most important ways from anybody that you're listening to in the Trump administration. It's the same party for all intents and purposes because the same Zionist Jewish billionaire cabal owns both houses, the Senate and the House. And I don't see any evidence that that's going to change in the near term. Now, long term, I think it definitely will. that's another issue, because I think we are going to crash and burn financially in the next few months. Everybody thinks, oh, we can get by with the Besant's games and mechanisms for another couple of years. I don't think so. I think we're very close to going over the edge and down into the abyss. But having said that, what you're really saying is, how could Kushner be so brazen as to come out in public and essentially posture as being in charge of the American government? Well, he is.
Luke Sightwalker says, this channel used to be pro-American. Hasn't been that way for almost a year now.
Okay.
Under what metric?
Pro-American war?
Yeah, maybe, Colonel, you could unpack. What exactly would that mean? Not pro-American. Here we are saying we want to end this mindless boondoggle in the Middle East, repatriate the money that we're sending to Ukraine and Israel, not putting American soldiers and sailors in harm's way, and focusing on rebuilding the infrastructure of the United States of America. Wouldn't it be amazing, instead of sending billions of dollars to Ukraine or these other places, that we build out a rail system in the U.S., that we fix our broken military? I mean, you just look at the USS Abraham Lincoln, for crying out loud. Reports over the last 24 hours that, in fact, it had been sitting without power, like floating powerless in the water. I know, it just infuriates me when I see a comment like that. Colonel, any your thoughts?
I didn't know that was the Abraham Lincoln. I thought that was the USS Benfold, a destroyer that sat and had to be pulled by a tug
right
over to the Philippines. Look, this man may be a Zionist. I don't know. We have them, and you haven't noticed. And they equate Israeli national interests or Zionist Jewish interests with American interests. You might as well say that, I don't know what his name is. It was recently elected as the future Democratic representative in Michigan, Dr. Zaid or something. If you listen to him, I think over time, Muslim interests will be characterized as equal to or indistinguishable from American interests. I think we've lost our sense of who and what we are. And I think that was inevitable, because life in this country has been too good for too long. I hate to be blunt, but prosperity does damage after a while, especially when it's unearned. And we are beneficiaries of the prosperity that was built by our forefathers. And we've enjoyed it immensely. We've raped it. We've abused it. We've allowed it to be hollowed out. But we haven't paid attention to what was being done to the nation as a consequence of our complacency. So that doesn't surprise me. It's just disappointing. Again, we have no strategy. We haven't had a strategy really since the Soviet Union collapsed and the state system went with it. I think what we adopted was something we called the rules-based liberal international order, which was really an attempt to consolidate American political, military, economic hegemony over the world behind the facade of something that was going to spread democracy, human rights, goodness, love, and truth everywhere, which was all nonsense. What we did was we began a series of interventions, ultimately designed to edge out and suppress anybody who could be a potential competitor. So I think that's where we are now. And Donald Trump is becoming increasingly aware that this facade has fallen in the Gulf. We are not the invincible, invulnerable superpower in military or economic terms that we presented to be. He does that, and so he's willing to do anything he can at home to prop up this system that is falling apart financially, really behind the scenes. And at the same time, he's going to use military power to demonstrate the greatness of our country. Well, I'm sorry, using military power to demonstrate greatness doesn't work very well when it doesn't live up to expectation and performance, and it hasn't. So he's got a hell of a mess on his hands. Even though, and I got to be frank here, this is something that nobody ever brings up. The state of the military today is not a consequence of things that he did per se. It's been a long, slow march to decline and irrelevance that's been going on for 30 years. It's just that he didn't understand it, didn't know anything about it. Tried to bring it up. It was completely misunderstood. We're the greatest in the world. We can say that all you want, all day long, all night long. It doesn't make any difference. Military power is something that takes decades to build, and you've got to adapt as you build it to new and unanticipated developments, not just technologically, but socially, politically, economically. We haven't done any of that. You're looking at the old Cold War, World War II model in its final days in the Persian Gulf. And then you have something else. You have two competing systems. You have the Western American-dominated financial system, which has effectively exploited everybody to make ourselves rich and powerful and demanded that everybody do as we say. And then you have BRICS. It's emerging on the other side. It's centered on China, which is now the largest economy in the world. It is certainly the most powerful economy in terms of buying or purchasing power. And you have other states moving to it to get out from under us. They're tired of being oppressed by us. And essentially, we've created debt traps for large numbers of people all over the world, the thing we accuse China of. And how do you get out from under it? Well, you renounce it and you join BRICS. I think we're going to see that more and more and more. Our currency is in trouble. I'm not sure the dollar will survive. People that can are de-dollarizing. We're in a new world now, but we don't want to be there, and we're going to fight living there as long as possible. But at some point, we're not going to have any choice in the matter.
I want to ask you about the living conditions of these sailors. So we're seeing media reports that they don't have soap, they have slop food, they have gone without power for days on end. So I want to ask you what you've heard about this, and then a more sensitive question: do you think the officers are living the same way?
Well, first of all, there's a big difference between being at sea for 289 days and being on land for 289 days. I listened to someone on television say, well, I was sitting in Afghanistan eating ramen noodles, and we didn't have everything, and, what are they complaining about? Well, I've got news for you. I mean, a lot of places over my military, I'd be delighted to have ramen noodles and didn't have them. But having said that, he's never been to sea. Isolation, months and months, or like years at sea. And you can only expect a human being to endure so much. People feel lost, isolated, miserable. The food isn't very good at the moment. I've been told that by several sources. The quality of life is terrible. But we've got another problem. We've alienated everybody in the region. So there are very few places we can put into port. People don't want us in the region. This is why we're finished in the Persian Gulf. It's not just a function of our support for Israel. People are tired of us. The Israeli problem is huge, but they're tired of us. And, we can't expect sailors to do this for 289 days. It's inhuman. So they should not be criticized for this. Now, you raised an interesting question. What about the officers? Well, I don't know about the officers on board ship. I'm sure they're sharing in the misery. But I think the admirals have done a pretty terrible job of the last 30 years. And I certainly saw evidence for that when I was working for the Secretary of the Navy back in 2007 and 8. The shipbuilding programs were a disaster. We were producing ridiculous ships like the Zumwalt that cost over $1 billion when what we needed were more, faster, less expensive ships that could provide what the Navy needed to do. We had too few people on active duty in the Navy, too few ships, and we were pretending as though it was still 1990 or 1980 when we had 300-400 ships. We don't have that. It's back to we are a short war military structure. We only have enough forces to fight for a short period of time. And we've gotten away with it now since 1991 because weak adversaries and because we still had enormous infrastructure and support in the places where we operated. We don't have that in the Indian Ocean. We don't have it in the Middle East anymore. And as a result, we have too few ships with too few people trying to do too much for too long. The admirals should stop it. The admirals should have stood up and made it very clear to the president what he could and could not do. But everyone misjudged Iran. Everyone grossly underestimated the Iranians. And now we're paying a terrible price. We have the wrong force in the wrong place for the wrong purpose, fighting an enemy we didn't expect to perform as he has.
We have a super chat here I want to read to you, Colonel, and I'll ask this, and then I have a follow-up question. Here it is. Actually, maybe I can. Someone can read that. Can someone read that? David, could you read that?
Not being filled because China makes all our missiles components. How can we fight them?
Yes. Well, we're talking about the rare earths and our lack of access to them. For the last 30 plus years, people have mentioned repeatedly in the military side, I can tell you, the criticality of having a earth refinery on the North American continent. There is no shortage of rare earths. The problem is we have to send them to China or another sun and fun spot called Kazakhstan in order to have them refined. Kazakhstan, of course, lies in Central Asia and has close relations with both China and Russia. If you can't refine them, it doesn't matter how many you've got. So it's not just dependency on China for rare earths. There are other areas, and microcircuitry is another one. Again, no thought was given to any of this when we embarked on these ridiculous missions. Again, no one thought it through. So it reminds me of the British Empire and their decision to enter World War I. And suddenly the Admiralty and the Royal Navy had to tell everybody, well, we depend entirely on the Germans for all our optics. What are we going to do now? And it was not just optics, it was also chemicals, because Germany's chemical industry and its optical products were at the top of the world in terms of everybody's needs. Nobody thought about it. Well, Britain found workarounds because they had the United States to turn to as well as other allies. We're not in as strong a position. Again, no one thought anything through. The only strategy we had under Donald Trump was, we're going to do what Israel wants. Israel wants it, so we're going to do it. And we're going to destroy anybody who gets in our way. That's a great plan, Mr. President.
So if we look now at where any kind of negotiations are happening, which doesn't seem like there are anything going on, maybe something behind the scenes. You have President Trump saying that the talks are off, Iran saying that there's no discussions, Iran saying we are going to strike European targets if we are provoked again. And then, of course, you have the diesel prices spiking as a result of the strait being closed. Like, maybe you could play out for us over the next 2 weeks. What do you see unfolding here?
Well, the diesel crisis in Europe is more acute than it is here in the United States. The Europeans are heavily dependent upon trucks, transportation for everything. They're coming to a halt. I think you're going to see outbursts of anger, frustration, and violence all over Europe. I've talked to people in the Balkans, people in Germany, people in Great Britain. It's going to get ugly. It's going to be very bad. You should bring on Dr. David Betts, professor from London, who's written extensively on civil unrest and what he thinks is going to happen in Great Britain. But I think he can give you a good snapshot of what we can expect in Europe. And I think it's enormous unrest. I think we're going to see governments torn down and people harmed as a result of this in a major way. So that's one thing. In the other, I think beyond just the diesel, these two wars are merging into one. Remember, we had this Ukrainian system, I guess, unmanned system, which was really from, I think, Germany or Great Britain, and it was used against a Russian ship or an Iranian ship in the Caspian Sea. I think we're going to see more of that in the future because Zelensky and Netanyahu are really joined at the hip. And both of them desperately need to drag us into their respective wars for them to survive. Now, we're already dragged into the Israeli wars in the Middle East, although it's becoming much more difficult now.